And I think Louisa's going to be hanging on because she's been excited to hear this as well. Okay, good. So we're recording. You can still hear me, Matt? You're good?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. And we're going to be recording in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Matt, thank you so much for coming on to the Stop Chasing Pain podcast. It's really an honor to have you on my show. It truly is.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, Perry.
Well, we were talking a little bit before I started to hit the record button, how I got turned on to your work and the things that you're doing with raw optics through my friend Jack Cruz, who's been a guest on my show about 2 times in the past. And of course, he melts a lot of brain cells when he talks about different things. And but I started to follow your work, and we got a hold of some of your glasses that you were kind enough to send out to us through my assistant director of operations, Louisa. And I was really taken when I started looking at your work, which you're going to talk a lot about, but about your story and about your journey into actually forming this company. So can you get into that for me?
Yeah, it is a bit of a long story, but I'll give you the basic version. When I was growing up, I was having a lot of health issues that were really challenging for me. Namely, I was having, from even as young as I can remember, age 5, 6, 7, I was having really bad gas, bloating when I would eat meals, something that's just uncomfortable, but you never think, especially that young, that there's anything you could actually do about it. It's just kind of like, that's just how it is. It's funny. It's weird. It is whatever. It's just life. It's genetic. My parents probably took me to a pediatrician or this or that, and they said, you should take this pill, or avoid this food or something like this, take Tums. And it didn't really do anything, of course, these strategies. And that's how it went. And then as time evolved in middle school, I was getting, I already had really bad pollen allergies, but I was getting worse and worse allergy symptoms, congestion, just itchy eyes and throat. In the springtime, it was really challenging across the board. And then around the same time, I was having headaches. I was starting to get migraines, things that were just really, really not fun, to say the least. So going into high school, I still was facing all these things, and they were getting way worse. And my daily experience was just a challenge. It was just like I'm, in high school, I'm having fun, I'm partying or hanging out with girls or playing sports. Like I was trying to do those things, but I was really physically just not feeling well, which is not normal, especially for someone of that age. Usually people's health starts to deteriorate maybe in their 30s or older, depending on your lifestyle and your genetics and so on. Anyhow, so that all led me to look for nothing actually in particular, because I just was totally convinced that it was all genetic. But when I started getting bad acne, that triggered me to say, oh my gosh, I need to fix this. Like, I just don't want to live with this. I don't want to have this, poor skin and all these things going on. Right. So the thing that was really interesting to me when I started learning about acne and skin health and all this stuff and researching, I came across the paleo diet. And then I started reading these things that were saying, not only can you heal your, acne and this and that with this diet by healing your gut, you can actually heal your allergies and headaches. Those don't actually have to happen. And gut issues, that actually doesn't have to be part of your daily experience. And I was like, what? There was nothing in my consciousness ever before then that had even slightly indicated to me that those things didn't have to be part of my experience and that they could potentially even be cured. Not even the slightest awareness of anything remotely similar to that possibility. And so when it came, I was just all of a sudden blown away. And I was reading these paleo authors like Mark Sisson talk about epigenetics and how you could change your diet, which is in his mind the main lever you can pull to affect your health, and then change basically your epigenome, which is the expression of your genes, and therefore your biology, your physiology, and all that stuff. And that was really, really insightful for me. I bought into the idea that food was the main lever that you could pull to affect these things for about 1.5 to 2 years early in high school, my freshman, sophomore, and going into my junior year. And as a result, I had some big improvements, but I continue to struggle pretty significantly because I was just going from one diet to paleo diet to an autoimmune paleo diet to a GAPS diet to some other stricter diet, and then I got into a whole cycle of binging and, basically I had made progress, but as I continued to try to heal these issues with food, it wasn't really working. It was just a struggle. And that's when I learned about this guy, Dr. Jack Kruse, who's a mutual friend of ours, starting to say all over the internet, especially in the forums and the paleo blog world, that diet isn't the main lever, that there's these things in our cells called mitochondria, which drive all of the functions in our body. And if they work well, then we work well, because they allow us to take our food and our diets and our other things that we do and turn it into useful energy and function well, right? And so if they work well, we work well. If the mitochondria don't work well, conversely, then we're going to have issues no matter how good our fuel is. Just like if you have a car that has faulty, worn out spark plugs and you go from putting in regular gas to premium gas, the spark plugs are still broken. It's not fixing the spark plugs. So you have to go to the mechanic and actually fix the spark plugs, and then you can use regular gas like you did before and still work fine or great, better than you were with bad spark plugs and premium gas. And yet people are trying to solve mitochondrial issues, which are damages in our engines or dysfunction in our engines, with diets, which is like premium fuel for our body. But yet, again, if the engines are dysfunctional, which is caused by a number of factors, but primarily, as I was learning from Dr. Kruse, the transition to the indoor lifestyle, deficiency of full spectrum sunlight, and excess artificial light. If you have these circumstances in play, among other factors, those being two of the largest, the engines aren't going to work optimally. So putting in premium fuel isn't going to fix the bad environment and the broken cellular engines. We need to actually go back and fix them. So again, you could be eating a premium diet and not healing your issues. And that was my case. I started to learn is that I'm doing super clean bone broth, vegetables, meats, and my body's just not healing. Like my healing potential is gone. And one of the most interesting things, as I met more people in the Kruse community, some of whom are young MDs who have been working in functional medicine clinics, and they mentioned that their patients they'll see where they're older and they'll do these certain types of treatments, whether it's an IV or other supplement therapies. And these older people will actually receive huge benefits from these therapies and these treatments. And they'll do the same treatments to a younger person who spends all day playing video games, and they will get way less results or no results compared to that more older or elderly person, which would seem to be the opposite. But if you look at the fact that that elderly person, sure, they have issues that have accumulated, but at the core, they grew up maybe in a healthier environment, in a healthier time, eating healthier food, outdoors more in their childhood. They actually have potentially more of this, what's called, as Jack Kruse calls it, redox potential, which is basically mitochondrial energy production capacity in their cells, where they just need these extra supplements and this and that, and it can actually tip the scales for them to get the benefits. Whereas when you have a young, sick child who's blue light toxic, meaning they're indoors all day, never gets any sunlight, you can give them all the supplements in the world and do all these things, but because their fundamental healing capacity, which is basically how well our mitochondria work and the energy systems in our body work, if that isn't working because of that lifestyle, then all these supplements, all these clean diets aren't going to work, because ultimately the diets and the fuel, it's just giving you raw materials that are going to allow your body to build itself. Like no one seriously thinks, or at least I hope no one seriously thinks, although many actually do, that you, by eating healthy food, it's somehow actually healing your body. It's like, what's actually happening when you eat healthier food? Your body still has to break it down, make it useful. So if the potential to do that is damaged, then it doesn't matter how good the fuel is. And that's what I started to learn about. And I was like, whoa, like this is so next level beyond anything I've ever even conceived of being possible. And so naturally I became like just a total fan of Jack Kruse and wanted to read his work because it seemed like he knew what he was talking about. And I did. I worked on these principles and I started to actually see more and more benefits. Now, the interesting thing is fast forwarding that was when I was going into my 16th year, and going to my junior year of high school. And it's been 5 years since then. And I've benefited tremendously by applying these principles. But it's funny because, speaking with hindsight, I've identified that there's almost another wall that I started to run into, which is that if I started to realize that if I have these old belief systems in place, that are things from when I'm younger. Some people would argue from a past life or whatever you want to say, but there's these old belief systems, old patterns. Say they just come from our childhood and our programming from our youth when you're in a theta state and you're just super impressionable, or for all these things that are happening around you and the way people talk and think and look and interact. These have an effect on us, as you of course know, and oftentimes they're even stored in our fascia, these experiences and traumas. That's something that might be hotly debated, but anyhow, nonetheless, we have these patterns. If we have these old patterns in our system, in our brain, that are causing us to be in a chronic state of stress or fight or flight, which I've identified that I had or am working through, then no matter how much light you take into the system and how much you optimize all these environmental factors, you could actually still very well be struggling with old belief systems. And so there's a guy, I'm imagining you're familiar with, Dr. Joe Dispenza, who's a leader in this field. So that's something I'm no expert in, like I am on the light side of things, but that is such a relevant subject that I think is going to be more and more relevant over time. But that, to me, all the things we're going to talk about here today are going to be focused on mostly on our external light diet, which is the stuff to optimize all these environmental factors I was referring to. But that stuff is more on the internal light diet, where you're actually optimizing what's inside to take advantage of everything else. Just as optimizing your external light diet can help people to get more results, whether they're getting chiropractic work done, or they're doing myofascial release therapy, or they're eating a cleaner diet, or they're working out more, or they're doing any other intervention. Getting our light environment dialed in by optimizing these internal healing systems, specifically our mitochondrial function, everyone can get a better result from all those things. And in the same way, this inner light work, I believe, can help to take that to a whole nother level. But I do believe they're all necessary. So really, that's sort of the progression of my story. I sort of left out how after getting really deep into this, I wanted to have my own business and my own sort of financial freedom. So that's how I ended up starting Raw Optics, my blue light blocking glasses company, because there were no glasses that met the specifications that Dr. Cruz, who was and is still the leading expert on the subject, was saying are necessary. The Swanwick sleep glasses didn't block enough of the blue light range, of overall light range, and I didn't like their frame styles. They were low quality and unattractive to me. True Dark, another company out there, their night glasses were, again, low quality frames, still are, and they were falling apart easily for people, and they were too dark, so they were dysfunctional. They didn't work for most people. So I wanted to find something, great quality frames, high quality lenses that block the right wavelengths, not too much, not too little, based on the specifications that Dr. Cruz were saying are necessary. And that's exactly what we solidified on. And that's how Raw Optics was born. So great quality frame styles, the lenses that actually block the right wavelengths, that are tested to ensure that they do this. And that grew over the last 3 years since I started it. The birthday was, a couple days ago, actually, and it's grown tremendously. And now here I am, just focusing on growing my business and learning as much as I can about all these interesting things and improving myself, and then sharing this message so that people can not be stuck just on diet and exercise forever.
Well, that's it for the show, guys. That was like so much information.
Yeah.
So much was coming out of what you said on that one that I want to go over and backtrack a little bit.
Let's do it. Thanks for opening that space up. I'm glad to be able to share with people.
Well, I mean, I love it, man, because, I mean, you're the guest. I mean, they want to hear what you've got to say, and, I love that. I mean, you're like the perfect guest. I just asked one question, and I come back. Thumbs up. And what I did not know, I'm going to go backtrack a little bit.
Let's do it.
I thought that, like, Jack found you, but you actually were learning from Jack and took the principles that he was saying. And what's even more impressive, man, is that you caught on it at junior and high school, and you knew there was something else. And it was the same for me, where I went down I was like, holy cow. I mean, food can make that much of a difference for me, right? And it did for like a little while, but then I hit a wall, and I'm like, what else? There's got to be something else. So when you were saying that, I mean, and I've had so many patients that come in to see me who are knowing enough that they should seek some outside functional medicine advice, but it was zeroed in mostly on a lot of supplementation and dietary changes. And the same thing happened where some people would get her, some people would not, but they didn't know where to turn afterwards. So, you know, I give you props for knowing that there was something bigger for that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was something where it was just, I guess, a natural, intuitive feeling once once the curtain has fallen, so to speak, and you see that there's a lot more behind the stage and you can't see the end, you're just like, whoa, where does it end? And it still hasn't ended yet for me. I'm still kind of just looking and looking and looking. But again, as I mentioned, I think the whole Joe Dispenza spiritual consciousness work, that gap, as you mentioned, actually, which I think is very fitting, that gap, or more so bridge, it's really becoming a bridge more than a gap between West and East, or East and West, is really the furthest that this can really go. That is because these people have been practicing and studying Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine for 5,000 years, or in both of those cultures. And they've discovered quite a few things in that time and known quite a few things. And here I am in many ways looking at the most advanced Western research and what it implies. And basically it's taking us right back to that, barring maybe a few exceptions. And of course there are many things that at least a few things that Western medicine has learned that can help people, but ultimately they had a lot of stuff dialed in. I mean, for example, when we have EMF, which is this, wireless technology that's all over, Dr. Cruz talks about it a ton and how huge of a risk it is. That's something that traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine could not possibly have foreseen. And so, in their time, all the things they're sharing may have been exactly right to be optimally healthy. But now if you practice full Ayurvedic principles or traditional Chinese principles and you live under a cell tower, like the biophysical constraints are different. There's a previously unpredictable factor that's affecting our systems. So there's certain pieces of what, more than Western medicine, but just the most advanced Western research, which from a biology perspective, I believe that's where people like Dr. Cruz really sit. There's a lot of things we can take from that will help people in the modern world. And that's where, again, this light diet that I speak of is relevant, because back then it was almost a given that you grew up in nature. There was no real necessarily such thing as indoors. Yeah, I mean, there was, but they didn't have necessarily the glass that would filter out the full spectrum of sunlight. They didn't necessarily wear sunglasses or contact lenses or glasses, because not everyone had, these eye issues that are so prevalent in our society today, which very few people ever question. But if you really think about it, like, how would people survive in the wild if you can't see 20/20? That's like your most important survival tool, besides maybe your smell and your hearing and of course your intuition. So it's just, these are questions that aren't asked, but there's so much value from those ancient traditions, but there's also so much value from this, I believe, very advanced Western research on photobiology, how light affects the body, and looking at just reality and how we can optimize things to get back to where we were then, so that we can then apply all those old principles to get to the best that we can be to the extent possible today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got to tell you, those the two words that you used that really resonated with me, and I thought it was powerful when I just took it in for a moment, and I wanted to ask you about it, and if you could tell me what these words mean to you when you said it, and I'll tell you what I think. You said healing potential, and I love that, because there's so many things that people are doing to try to help themselves that are helpful, right? But does the body have the potential to do anything with what you're trying to do to it? I think that's that's a paradigm shifting perspective, in my opinion.
It's a really, really interesting concept. Well, if you'd like, I can touch on a little bit where that comes from.
Yes.
So one of the researchers Dr. Cruz really turned me on to a lot of different researchers in the medical field from the last 100, 200 plus years. And these guys are some of the researchers in the shadows, we might say, who have been studying certain concepts very meticulously, but because their work was either controversial or threatening to certain paradigms, thereby being controversial, it wasn't often looked at. And these are people, this one in particular I'm referring to as Dr. Robert O. Becker. He was a researcher on basically bone physiology, an orthopedic surgeon who did his residency during World War II. So he was basically working in some of the bloodiest, most terrifying scenes you could ever imagine, in one of the largest hospitals in Manhattan in the thick of World War II, being a resident. Really, really tough place, I'd imagine, to go through residency, seeing amputations and people with their faces blown off and all kinds of nasty things. And so he started naturally asking the question, why can salamanders and certain animals basically regenerate entire limbs, and why can't humans? It's a really interesting question. And so he started to research these animals that could regenerate entire limbs and tried to figure out what is it overall that ultimately allows a system, specifically a living organism, to actually heal and regenerate. And he found that it has to do with electricity, basically. So that's why he called his book, that where he really detailed all of his research, The Body Electric. And so what that kind of means to us is that there are these systems that exist in us that allow us to heal. And if they work, then we can heal maybe almost no matter what happens to us. And if they don't, then almost no matter what we do, we cannot heal. Now, on a sort of tangent from our main discussion here, what he found is that the reason the salamanders can regenerate is that they've, for the amount of electrical, let's say, potential that an organism can have, they've packed so much more into so much smaller of a space that they can lose a limb and literally regenerate it. Where if we've sort of, as a different type of organism, taken a different niche in the evolutionary hierarchy, where we are much larger. And so there's sort of ratios and numbers and all the stuff that he details in his books that is not all my specific area of expertise. But basically, if you think of it like this, they pack so much energy into a small space as a salamander, so they can use that energy even if they lose a limb to actually regrow. We are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times bigger than a salamander. So we took our energy availability, so to speak, from the environment and chose the path of a larger organism that thereby has more control over its environment, more basically qualities of the apex predator or a high-level predator who can kind of control its environment. But in exchange for that, if we lose our limb, like, we're not going to get it back. But yet our lifespan's longer than salamanders. We have all these other advantages, right? So that's sort of, now if we lived in such a rich environment where we were so energetically dialed in under maybe, again, probably circumstances that don't even exist on Earth, but they maybe could exist on some planet at some point, maybe an organism of our size could have the capacity to regenerate, because the difference between us and a salamander in the universe's eyes is nothing. We're both tiny, so you get the idea anyhow. But just based on Earth, that's where we are. So that's an interesting tangent for people to get an idea of what this healing capacity kind of is. It's this energetic flow through our bodies. Now, of course, though, what they do know is the most a human can regenerate, especially a young human, when our energy systems are the most dialed in because they decline as we age, is the tip of a finger. If you cut off a certain amount of the tip of a finger, like a quarter inch, it's been documented in humans for about that much to regenerate. Now, interesting other tangent, Becker and his team, by researching this electrical system in the body and actually using electrodes essentially to augment it, they were actually able to regenerate an entire limb on a mammal, which is the first and maybe only time it's ever been done. I believe it was on a dog, which is amazing. But their research was cut and defunded because his protege, Andrew Marino, was starting to research how external electromagnetic fields could affect these internal systems, and therefore was getting into controversies around the safety of high voltage transmission power lines in the 70s and 80s. And because those controversies were affecting the power industries and also threatening the Navy's use of radar during the Cold War and other uses of radar for military applications. They gained a lot of, shall we say, pushback and hatred from both the power industry and from the Navy, who are two very influential parts of the United States economy, industrial military complex, and therefore they were defunded because they were Veterans Administration labs, so they could easily be defunded by the VA and the military. And so that was that. The research is still documented. Some people try to continue it. But so back to our conversation of the actual regenerative capacity that we have as organisms. I'm glad you find it so fascinating, because I do too. You pretty much nailed it on the head. If someone doesn't have a functional system for regenerating, you could be doing all the right things, but ultimately, like when you or when you get a scab, or you skin your knee or something, like, are we thinking, like, am I thinking, oh, let me heal this? Like, not really. It just kind of heals itself based on what's happened. And it's very much a passive process. Although certain, again, Eastern masters have been able to learn how to channel their chi, which is part of this energy system, to be able to heal much more quickly, even healing other people's wounds without touching them directly with their own hands, which is fascinating too. But we don't do anything for that process. So in the same way, like when we're working on healing our bodies, we're more talking about removing obstacles and letting our body's own systems do the work than we actually are doing things to optimize it. For the most part, like, most diets, most exercise, you're avoiding things that harm you. You're giving yourself the physical raw materials to support, but the body still has to do all the work. So what we're talking about with the light diet is what are the ways we can actually augment those healing systems, looking at those. And again, that gets into sunlight, mitochondria, cold thermogenesis, and something Dr. Kruse hasn't spoken about a ton, but did earlier on in his writing, the benefits of meditation, lowering your stress levels, even things like having sex and being in great loving relationships. Like, these are all things that can potentially optimize these energy systems. So that's the subject there.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I actually have that book, Body Electric, and it takes a while to read it. There's like a lot of I read a paragraph, I'm like, no, I gotta like rest my brain for a second and read that again.
Oh yeah.
But that reminds me of a phrase that I use. I'm not sure who said it first or whatever, but it is so applicable. As I tell people, it's almost not so much what you start doing that's going to help you get better, but what you stop doing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's here's the thing, is that people just don't know what they don't know. They don't know that they need to stop that stuff, or maybe they do, but they don't know what to do about it. So that's going to lead me into, for you, because a lot of people may be at that stage where they hear this, they read this, but they don't do anything about it. So take me along this journey of when you decided that you wanted to go and start the company. And I'm going to be honest with you, how in the hell do you even begin to put something like this together? First of all, you nailed the damn name. It's awesome. And I'd like to know why you chose that name too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a lot there.
Yes.
As far as healing and removing things, of course. I mean, I agree. It is a lot about removing obstacles, because the body does have this sort of innate healing capacity. But again, as we discussed, if we can identify how to strengthen those things that help our system, that is just priceless, obviously, but it's challenging. And one of the things that I faced when I was struggling with trying to do diets to improve my health, and I was basically like yo-yo dieting at a certain point, because I was getting really strict, but then wasn't feeling results and was having huge cravings for all the wrong types of foods, like just sugary carbohydrate type foods. I couldn't figure out, and none of the diet or people could really explain or were explaining why this might be the case. It was just like, oh, just push through the keto flu and you'll be fine eventually. And I took months and I never ended up getting through it. It was really tough. And again, it makes sense when I started to understand that they're not addressing the root issue of damaged mitochondria. If you live an indoor lifestyle, never get sun, live under a cell tower, or you're on your phone all day, and you're eating a perfect clean paleo diet, like, it isn't going to solve the problems, because it isn't addressing one of the main root issues of those things that I just described. So for me, it's great that there's this new understanding of the things people can start to do to improve their overall health that can ultimately help them to get rid of those other things. You know, like you do a couple things that are good for you, like you start getting more sunlight, dialing in your circadian rhythm, dialing in your sleep, taking some ice baths, that kind of thing. And between those types of interventions and other things, but especially circadian rhythm, sleep, cold exposure, and so on, you can reduce carbohydrate cravings because you're optimizing your mitochondrial function. You know, you can start to get yourself to a better place, and then those better decisions, the things that are in your way, can actually become easier so that there is, you know, something you can maintain rather than just always feeling like it's just such a challenge. So that's a really, really cool thing for people to know. When it comes to the business, I was just blessed to have, you know, had the health issues that I had. I believe that I was blessed to have learned about the paleo diet and Mark Sisson and Rob Wolf and Chris Kresser and all these guys, and then to have come across Dr. Jack Kruse and have been so inspired to look into his work and read his blogs and books and listen to all the podcasts he did for several years, and I still do, just to really understand what was going on. And then from there, I was blessed again to have a friend who was also part of Dr. Cruse's community because he was very forward thinking. He was also pretty young, a couple years older than me at the time. So when I was 16, he was maybe 19 or 20, and we just knew each other through Facebook, because that's kind of how it is with these kinds of communities. You know, there's so few people in this niche that if I want to talk to someone who's about my age, it's like there might be 3 or 4 or 5 people in the whole world who are following this work. And I know I know about them because they're in the same Facebook groups and on the same forums. So it's really cool how the internet can connect people from across the world with these, disparate places, but similar interests. And so one of these guys happened to have a separate interest of like entrepreneurship and startups. So he handed me a couple books, again, virtually through the internet, and basically said, you know, read these. They're going to help you a ton. Like one was the 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, about creating something new and bringing it to market at scale. There was The Hard Thing About Hard Things by, I believe it's Paul or Ben Horowitz, one of the founders of another one of these big tech companies in Silicon Valley. There was The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss, which was an essential book for me. And this idea of like, wow, I could build an online business and basically be free and be part of the new rich. Like I was totally inspired. And then there was The Lean Startup by a guy named Eric Ries, who basically describes, he ran a very much failed startup company because long story short, they built a whole product with all these features early on in the internet, this sort of software business, that no one even wanted the core product, not to mention the millions of dollars they had spent on all these special features. And he basically came up with this model, which is now the basic model for all startups in Silicon Valley, called a lean startup, where you don't necessarily build all this fancy stuff. You use what's called a minimum viable product to test a hypothesis of something you think might work, and then build from there, rather than being super top heavy and coming up with a whole business plan when you don't even have one potential customer. So it's a different way of approaching business, and it was really beneficial for me to have this knowledge. And so between these business books, all this health information that my own pain and suffering led me to, it was ripe. And also not wanting to be dependent on my dad's money basically, and have to go to college, because that's how most, if it's either you get a job and work, or you go to college and your parents will pay for it, and then you're still going to have to get a job. You're just postponing the inevitable, or maybe preparing yourself a little bit more. But so the business opportunity by the time I had graduated high school was landscaping all summer and preparing to take a gap year and saving money to go travel the world and try to get an idea of what I really wanted to do, all this stuff. The business idea came pretty fast once I had all the pieces lined up. And in other words, it didn't just come to me. I had done the whole lifetime of work had led to this point when the right opportunity came. It was clear to me. I had thought of several other ideas over the previous year and tried them and researched and tried to implement, and none of them really came to fruition, but this one just worked. And it was not as easy as just working. I've shed blood, sweat, and tears several occasions over blood, probably indirectly, but the other two for sure over the business. And it's 3 years later and it's just working really, really well. And we're helping, tens of thousands of people get glasses and better sleep, improve their circadian rhythms. And there's so much more to be done. But that is really how it all kind of came together without too much of the nitty gritty details. But I'm always glad to go deeper if you have more questions on that.
Oh, that was fantastic. And first of all, thank you so much for the book recommendations on that. That's great because I know a lot of people listening will jump on those and they have that spark to look for the how, look for the how.
Yeah.
And, yeah, that's a great model. And how did you come up with is it the name Ra? So I'm thinking like Egyptian god Ra.
Yeah, exactly. Raw. So not most, but a lot of people say it's RA optics, which is the bane of my existence, RA optics, because people don't know Ra, the Egyptian sun god Ra, like they know Zeus or Apollo. And so Ra, as you know, but maybe some listeners don't, Ra is the Egyptian god of sunlight and also the god of healing and medicine, which fits really nicely because the Egyptians knew that sunlight is pretty much the driving force for wellness in humans. And so by them having their chief or their sun god be this healing and medicine god, it was very clearly implied to me that, again, they knew this knowledge way, way, way back then. They even shaved their heads to get more light on their skulls to make them stronger and so on. And so when I was thinking of this business, at first I had built it up and called it Matt's Custom Blue Blockers because I was literally letting people send in their own glasses, and I would dip the lenses with a certain tint that blocked the right spectrum. Eventually people were just asking like, hey, can you offer your own line so that you could just, pick a style and go with it. And so that's what I ended up doing. And then when I realized that that was the way to go, it made it clear, okay, well, I'm going to call it its own name so that it's its own brand, separate for me. It can be its own thing. It isn't just innately tied to me where if I did want to build it, sell it, whatever, it just seemed right to have the brand be separate and maybe involve myself here and there. So Ra Optics just made sense because Ra is the god of sunlight. And I was thinking maybe I had actually, funny enough, seen Dr. Cruz post an Instagram picture a couple weeks before that time or months even, and it said Ra is my ma. Like, you get the idea, kind of like a play on a little joke there. And Ra was resonating in my head for a while because it's a very powerful oration or just phrase, Ra. And so for me, it was like, I want to use Ra. It was Ra Vision, Ra Glasses, Ra Blue Blockers, Ra this, Ra that. And eventually I realized like optics, Ra Optics sounds good. And optics means the study of the propagation of light, or just in general, like the movement of light. So optics has to do, again, with studying lenses, light, and all these kinds of things. And so Ra Optics is almost like a shorthand for Ra's optics. It's kind of like a way of saying the light of the sun god or the light of the sun or natural sunlight. Really, it's just sunlight, Ra Optics. It's just a synonym for sunlight. And so that's how I got to the name. And I think it's pretty cool and pretty clever. Also, I think it's pretty honestly clever that the logo, my idea for a logo was to use the R, which is the Eye of Horus, as the R in our logo. Now, that was something that makes it even harder for people to read because most people don't see that Eye of Horus or Eye of Ra as an R. But anyway, that's what I did. And so became involved. And so that logo, it's interesting. Yeah, there we go. So we're changing the logo, but that's supposed to be RA. We're going to shift it so it's more easy for people to read. So we're totally, redoing that. But you get the idea, right? That I learned much later. That symbol is what the Egyptians knew from their mummification and dissection of humans to be the cross section of the pineal gland. And so the pineal gland in the body is both, from a scientific perspective, the place where we make melatonin, which is the whole purpose of our glasses, to help optimize melatonin production and circadian rhythm. I didn't even know that when I picked it. And the other thing, of course, is that the pineal gland, which that is a representation of, is known as the seat of the soul or the third eye in different traditions. And so we're serving to try to help people elevate their consciousness and elevate their health in the Western science approach from circadian rhythms and melatonin, and in the Eastern way of optimizing, again, circadian rhythms, melatonin, and consciousness. And so thank you for asking. I've never explained that on a podcast, but it's cool to have the opportunity to do so.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm geeking out on that because, I mean, I love history, and especially, and I saw that. I'm like, okay, that's just badass.
Yeah.
And almost like it was just meant to be kind of thing, the way it evolved. And that's great. Thank you.
Well, my pleasure. Yeah.
I'm curious. So, because I know we're getting ready to come in on some time here, but you have glasses that are really cool frames, by the way. Love them. You have ones that you can have for daytime or nighttime. And I wanted to maybe have you talk about that a little bit, because some people might not know, should I get both? Should I get one? And what might be the differences between the two?
Yeah, that's a great point. So what we ought to do on our website, which we don't do now, but our new upcoming site in a couple months will be doing this, is really explaining that people do need both glasses for maximum benefit in the modern world. What that means, to kind of break down what are the two types of glasses we have. They're all the same frame styles, but there's two lens options. There's day lenses and night lenses. So the first one, start with the harder one, are day lenses. So people generally say, okay, I get blocking blue light at night, because when you block blue light at night, actually we'll start there. It makes more sense. So you block blue light at night because when you're out during the day, you're getting blue light from the sun. That was always natural. Morning sun has blue light inclining that signals to our brain all these things, all this information from the environment to set our circadian rhythm, our hormones, neurotransmitters, and all that good stuff. So that is blue light from the sun. There's a total different situation going on when you're getting blue light from an artificial light, because blue light from man-made lighting is not nearly as balanced. It's not balanced really at all like blue light from full spectrum sunlight is. Specifically balanced with red and infrared light, which is the more healing component of the spectrum. So when you get blue light from a screen or indoors, we need to be protecting ourselves from that blue light if we're not getting full spectrum sunlight. Now, what's interesting is the reason, it looks like I'm indoors, right? So I should be wearing my glasses with this computer screen in front of me. Well, actually, no, because I have this amazing, I'll even turn my screen around, but I have this little back patio area right here where it's just outdoors. So I'm getting the full spectrum of sunlight right now that's offsetting any of the damaging effects of the LED screen on my computer. If I were in an office, I didn't have this open, basically screen door with natural sunlight coming in, then I would wear blue blocking glasses. So if you're in an office, if you're in school, if you're in a grocery store, if you're in an industrial warehouse or manufacturing facility, that's when you would want to wear daytime blue blocking glasses, because you're going to need to reduce the blue light so that you're not getting all the damage of blue that isn't offset by healing red and infrared light. Another good way to think of it is if you look at a continuous full spectrum of light from the sun, people can Google spectrum of different light sources. And basically you can see that the sun is this continuous full spectrum. And so again, that red is balanced by I'm actually going to bring my little meter out, because I'm thinking I have such a good meter to do this test and demonstration. And do a lot of people watch video on this, or is it mostly audio?
There's a video on here too. Yeah, we do audio and video.
Yeah. Okay, great. I actually, the meters, it's out in my car. So I'll just explain this time around, but people, you should definitely, if you can, add in the show notes, spectral composition of different light sources. And I implore people to Google this so you can see what I'm talking about. But the best way to put it is, if you look at the spectral breakdown of sunlight, it's this continuous full spectrum of all the colors, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet, balanced. They're all balanced. And they each do different things in the body, and their relative levels, because they're all balanced, all of the systems in our body are tuned to them being balanced. So we get a certain amount of sort of damaging stimulus from blue light, but there's enough red and infrared that it offsets that sort of, let's say, damage from the blue light. It's a simple way to put it, but that's a decent way to explain it. Now, so when you go indoors, you have more blue light and none of the near infrared light, really, or very little of it, that's coming from the full spectrum sunlight. So now the blue that was previously balanced by the near infrared is now not just harmless. It's actually very harmful. It's kind of like the blue is a virus and the near infrared light is like an immune system. When you have that healthy immune system, a virus can actually make you stronger. But when you take out the immune system, but you still have a virus, literally a cold could kill you if you don't have any immune system. So that's what happens as soon as you go indoors and you don't have an open window or full spectrum sunlight coming in. Basically, again, windows filter it out, sunglasses filter it out. So you want to keep the windows open and let that full spectrum of light come in. A screen, like a mosquito screen, that won't filter it out because the holes are much bigger than the wavelengths of light, which are billionths of a meter in size. So, a screen's fine. But if you don't have that, we need to be reducing the blue, which is in excessive proportions on our indoor screens and lighting. I think that's pretty adequate treatment of the subject for people to understand why, again, indoors during the day, you want to wear blue blocking glasses, but outdoors during the day, we don't want to be filtering full spectrum sunlight. That's a key point for people to understand. So at night, the lenses are, again, the purpose is much more obvious. We're blocking any blue light, not just about 80% like our lenses do for day, because a little bit's okay to keep you awake. But it's depending on the range you define of blue light, it's like 100% of the most damaging range and about 90 to 95% of overall all of the blue light that our day lenses block. Our night lenses just block 100% of it and about 80% of all of the green light, which is something that has also been shown to have an effect on our circadian rhythm. These green light wavelengths, they're not going to damage our system as much as blue light does. That's why we don't block any during the day. Plus, it would make it really hard to have any color perception if you block all the blue and the green during the day. But so we do block it at night because at night we're supposed to be winding down. There's less light anyway. And so what happens when you put on a pair of our night lenses is by blocking any blue and green, which is what's coming from screens and artificial light sources and all these things, by blocking that blue and green light, the only colors that are remaining passing through for our eyes to see are red, orange, and yellow, and a little bit of green. And those are the colors of fire, red, orange, and yellow. So it's basically like turning the clock back 100 years or 150 years to when the only lights were either Edison incandescent bulbs, or even 200 years to when the only lights were gas lamps. So it's basically turning all the lights into gas lamps. And that is really what our night lenses do. And so as long as the lights that are around you are bright enough, which, generally they're overly bright and our eyes can adjust too, you're going to be able to see everything totally fine. And everyone does, and they love the products, but you're just not going to have the blue spectrum. So everything's going to have this coat of basically red, orange, just as if the only light sources were gas lamps. So that's really the difference between day and night. So I guess to answer your question, does everyone need both? Not really. If you can control your work environment and work and live in such a way that you're basically outdoors during the day all the time, then you can totally use only night lenses at night and then basically be outdoors or have full spectrum sunlight exposure throughout the day. That's simple. I rarely use the day lenses except for 2 occasions. If I'm driving at night and I don't want to fall asleep at the wheel, which I never do, I'll use my day lenses because they don't block as much as I'd like for night, but it's about 75% of what the night lenses block. So it's still a huge benefit compared to not wearing anything, right? The only other time I'll use the day lenses is if I do have like a conference or some seminar or something where I am going to be inside for extended periods of time during the day. And I don't want to wear my night lenses because, one, they affect the color significantly more, which at night I don't mind at all. And most people don't because it fits that calming vibe of nighttime. But during the day, it's very profound change when you're expecting to have more light. And so the day lenses are great for that reason of color perception. And they're great for the reason that you're not going to get as tired as if you're wearing the night lenses. In fact, you'll still have enough light coming through to be totally acute and awake. And I always recommend, final caveat or disclosures for everyone, if you do get the glasses, wear them, but make sure you go outside sporadically or actually frequently throughout the day, at least, 10 to 15 minutes every 2 hours minimum, or 5 minutes every 1 hour. Just for us, like people take cigarette smoke breaks. Just go outside, maybe don't smoke cigarettes, and then, be in the sun. That's a pretty solid practice there. So anyhow, that's really the difference between the lenses, and they're great for everyone. I'd say ultimately everyone should get both.
Great. Thank you very much for going over that. I appreciate that. That's important for them to know. And one more question before we start to wrap it up. I mean, you think you're eventually coming out with some that might be able to insert over people who have like prescription glasses?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we actually do is we actually offer prescription lenses with the protection. The reason why is because we've wanted them to be something that's going to be very, stylish, so that there's going to be really good compliance. And that for us is most effectively achieved by having a pair of glasses that has someone's prescription in them. And so those, you'll use your normal glasses when you're doing your normal things during the day. But then if you're spending a ton of time indoors during the day, you could have a pair of raw optics with prescription. And then if you are doing whatever you're doing at night, you could have a pair of raw optics night lenses with prescription as well. So maybe at some point in the future, we would come out with a clip-on, because for some people it's easier. But as of now, we just offer prescription in the lenses with the proper pigment in the lens to offer the protection that we need.
Oh, that's great. That's even sweeter. So people can actually go on your site or get in customer service and send you their script and then get the glasses.
Exactly. Yeah. You just simply, and it's not, we haven't advertised it like crazy. It works very well, and people love it that we offer it. And I actually have gone against the advice of many business mentors who have said, don't offer it. It's too complicated. It invites a lot of problems. For that reason that it's more complicated, it costs a bit more, but that's natural with prescriptions, especially for the service we're offering, which isn't something that you could get at any optometrist for any less than $500 or $600+. It doesn't even really exist. Most of them aren't able to get the lenses that we're able to get, because it's just not a hot commodity right now, although that's something we're also working on. But that is something we totally can do for people, and it's very easy. They upload their prescription to our website, and yeah, we'll always be making it easier and more straightforward as time evolves for everyone.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you, Matt, so much for coming and spending time on the show. I can't believe it went by so fast. I truly enjoyed it. Love to have you back in the future for sure. Can you tell everybody, where they go next? What's the next
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Well, I'd say for people to get glasses to really stoke out their circadian rhythm, people should go to rawoptics.com. That's raoptics.com. And I'm sure we can make a discount code for you guys to have for the audience. So people should check out the show notes. For example, maybe we could just do, so anyone who's listening to this has it on the recording, like stop chasing pain as a discount code. So, or what that would be is rawoptics.com/stop chasing pain. And that'll give people a discount. We'll get that dialed in, but it'll probably be 10% discount is our standard we're able to offer that for your tribe. And yeah, that'll be great. That link, rawoptics.com/stop chasing pain, can apply that discount. And that'll be.
Thank you. That's absolutely fine, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah, our pleasure. Thank you, honestly, for having me on the show and asking such good questions. I feel like we've really kind of almost transferred into a different universe in some respects, and just gone through so much. It's not rare, but it's for me, actually, I haven't had this experience of a podcast where there's so much just flow. So I would say pretty good questions you've been asking. So yeah, thank you.
It's all about that energy, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Great. I just got to get myself out of I'm in a cubicle.
Yes, exactly.
So I'm like right now. Yeah. So, but thank you so very much again for coming on. Really kind. I had a blast. And everybody listening, if you don't mind hanging on just for a second, Matt, so I can say my goodbyes to you.
Always, yeah.
Everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show. Truly honored that you come to learn with us with Stop Chasing Pain. And make sure you check us out on stopchasingpain.com. And we'll see you soon on the other side. Much love from Dr. Becker.